All right, guys, so we're going to move on from Ajax and XHR, and we're going to move to the Fetch API, which is a newer standard for dealing with HTTP requests. And we can do a lot of the same stuff that we do with Ajax in the XML HTTP request object. We can do the same kind of stuff with the Fetch API. Now, if we go over here into our console and we type in window, and we look at the window object, and just go down, you can see that fetch is now part of the window object, and there's a bunch of prototype methods and so on. All right, so this is what we're going to be using for the next few videos. What I would like to do is recreate the easy HTTP library that we created using fetch and using some updated standards from ES6. Instead of using prototypes, using classes, using promises, arrow functions, things like that. All right, because I want you guys to not only know the newest standards, but also understand how ES5 works and core JavaScript and all that. All right, now we have a Fetch API sandbox here with 3 buttons. So basically, I want the first one to fetch text from a text file, second one to get JSON from a JSON file, and the third to get something from an external API. Okay, so pretty much the same kind of things that we did with Ajax. All right, so I'm going to create a new file, and if you look at the HTML, I'm just using skeleton CSS here, and then we just have some buttons, and I have a div with the ID of output. So let's create a new file called, we'll just call this test.txt. All right, and in here we'll just say this is a sample text file. Okay, and we'll go back to, actually let's go to app.js, and we have button ID 1, 2, and 3. So we want to grab the button 1 ID. So let's say document dot get element by ID, button 1. We want to add an event listener. Let's listen for a click. And when it's clicked, let's call get text. All right, so now we'll go down here and we'll say get text function. And what do we want to happen here? So we want to use fetch. So all we have to do is just write the word fetch. Okay, call the fetch function, pass in whatever it is we want to get. In this case, what is it? Test.txt. Okay, and then like I said, fetch returns promises. Now remember, in the last video we looked at promises and we saw that when you get a response from a promise, you have to use .then. All right, so we'll say .then. Actually, I'll put this on a separate line, and then we're going to pass in here a function with a response. All right, and then let's see what that gives us. So we'll say console log res and save, and let's click the button here, and we get this response, and it has quite a bit of stuff attached to it. It has a body, I'm not going to go over all of this, but basically status 200 means that it got it. If I were to say test1.txt, which doesn't exist, then we look at that and status is 404. Okay, so we can check the status, and if we look at the type is basic URL, OK is true. Inside headers, we just have some prototype methods. But what we really care about is if we look in prototype here, we have JSON. Now we're not fetching JSON, we're fetching text. So if we go down here to text, this is actually what we want. Okay, so if I go console log res.text and save and click, we get a promise. Okay, so what we need to do is remember a promise. To get the response from a promise, we need to use .then. So let's return from this .then, let's return res.text. Okay, and then let's call another .then, because that res.text returns a promise, so we have to say .then again, and then in here we can actually get the data. Actually, We haven't done arrow functions yet. I think I'm going to do those next. But let's just put a regular function in here and pass in the data, because that's what that promise returns. And then we can say console.log data and save. And now let's click the button and we get, this is a sample text file. All right. So we want to return the text method that's in prototype because we're dealing with text. If we were dealing with JSON, we'd want res.json, and then we catch that promise and then we can grab the data. Okay. Now this looks like quite a bit more code than if we were to use arrow functions. So I will get to that when we talk about arrow functions. And we'll come back and we'll clean this file up a little bit. Now, as you saw in the last video, if there's some kind of error, then we can do .catch. Okay, so if they do a reject, then that will throw an error. So we'll pass in a function here. And we'll say error console.log error. Okay, so now if I go ahead and change this to test1.text, and you'll see that it's actually we're catching the error, and we're console logging it right here, and the error is cannot get /test1. All right, so that's how a simple get request works when you're working with a text file. So now let's create a JSON file. So let's say posts.json, and inside here, actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's actually output the data. So let's see. What I'm going to do is, instead of just console logging the data here, I'm going to say document dot get element by ID output dot inner HTML equals data. Okay, so now if I click the button, it comes out right here. All right, so now let's move on to the JSON. So let's go back to post.json, and we're going to just create an array here of JSON objects. So let's say title, post1, let's say body. This is post1. Okay, we'll put a comma here, and let's do 2 more. 2. 3. 3. All right, so we'll save that. Let's go back to app.js, and let's create another event listener for button 2. And then we're going to call get, we'll say get JSON. Let's actually copy this whole thing here. And I'm just going to put a comment here. We'll say get local text file data, get local JSON data. Okay, so it works the same way. We're going to just call fetch and then the name of the file, which is post.json. Okay, and then let's see, we want to do the same thing. Except we want to return res.json this time. And then the second then we'll get the data. And let's get rid of that. And let's just do a console log. So we'll save and then click get JSON, and you can see it gives us the data that's in that file. All right, now if we want to output this stuff, it's an array, so we'll have to loop through it. So we'll say let output equals nothing, and then we'll say data dot for each, pass in a function, and we'll just say post, and let's do output equal or plus equals. We want to append We'll say li, and then in here we'll just put the post title. All right, and then down here outside of the for each, we'll say document dot get element by ID output, and we'll set dot inner HTML equal to output. So we'll save and we'll click get JSON, and there we go. So we're pulling that in from the JSON file. All right, so now we want to do the get API data, so that's button 3. So let's save that, or copy that rather, and then just do 3, and we'll say get, we'll call it get external. Did I spell that right? No. So we'll go down here, let's copy this. Okay, so where do we want to get this from? Let's get it from, we'll get it from the GitHub API. So if we say api.github.com/users, it gives us a list of, I think, like the first 100 users or something. So we'll use that. So we'll grab this URL, paste it in here, and we can kind of use the same format. We're just going to loop through them. So again, we want JSON here, and then in the second, then let's say data.forEach, except we'll say user, and then let's put in here the user.login, because you can see there's a login value here, which is the username. All right, and then we'll output it. So let's save. Let's go and click, whoop, get external is not defined. That's because I need to change the name of this function. Okay, click it, and there we go. So now we're fetching all of these users from GitHub. All right, and we can use any of the data we want here. We can make other requests to these URLs, for instance, the followers, the repos, things like that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop here. We're going to work more with the Fetch API, but what I want to do in the next video is take a look at arrow functions. I think this is a good place to really talk about arrow functions because it can help us and just clean our code up in a lot of different places. All right, so we'll do that next.